Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be talking about some stuff today that you might not know about autism. It's definitely going to make you think differently about things, especially if you're used to hearing the typical kind of autism story.
Yeah, exactly. It's really important for us to go beyond those usual stories about autism, the ones that mostly focus on like boys and men. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
We're going to look at how society expects women to act and how that can really be tough for autistic women.
for sure. And for this deep dive, we're using some blog posts from a website called Cheap ABA. There was one post in particular that kind of blew my mind. It's called Autistic Women and Male Entitlement, the double whammy of discrimination. Like,
Yeah,
whoa.
that title double whammy really hits hard, right? It's like being hit from two sides at once.
Yeah.
But before we get into that specific post, maybe we should talk about what do you think of when you hear male entitlement? Especially like when we're talking about autistic women.
Honestly. The first thing that pops into my head is like, guys in meetings talking over women, assuming they know more, or even like taking credit for a woman's idea.
Yeah, I hear you. But I think it goes even deeper than that, don't you think? For
Yeah.
autistic women, it's like all these expectations and power dynamics that are always working against them.
Totally. And I'm seeing that like even in the titles of these other blog posts from Cheap ABA, we have Understanding Autism Spectrum Disorder in Adult Females and then Autism Symptoms in Black Women, Camouflaged or Overlooked. And there's even the challenges of high masking in autistic adult women, hormonal fluctuations and autism in women, and autistic women and internalized misogyny, a hidden struggle.
Wow, just reading those titles, you can tell there's so much to unpack here. It's wild how even things like being misdiagnosed or having sensory sensitivities can get even worse because of all the pressure society puts on women. It's like the world is designed to make things harder for them.
Okay, so let's dive into that Cheap ABA post called Autistic Women and Male Entitlement, the double whammy of discrimination. The author talks about three main ways this double whammy thing plays out, and the first one that hit me was all about stereotypes and gender roles.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Society's always telling women how they should act. Like they have to be nurturing, emotional, good at socializing. And for anyone, that's hard enough. But for autistic women who might have trouble with social cues or showing their emotions in the right way, it's like they're constantly under a microscope.
The post even said that autistic women sometimes get labeled as cold or uncaring just because they express their emotions differently. It's like they're being punished for not fitting into this perfect little box that doesn't even make sense.
Right, and the consequences can be brutal. Think about trying to get a job or even just go to a party when you're constantly worrying about what people think of you because you're not acting the way they expect.
It's like they're always walking on eggshells, never feeling like they can truly be themselves.
Absolutely. And it can mess with their self-esteem big time. They start to believe those same negative stereotypes that everyone throws at them.
So you have this pressure to fit these gender roles. And then on top of that, the post talks about objectification and sexual harassment. That's like a whole other level of messed up.
Yeah, that's where things get really scary. Because autistic women are often seen as either like childlike or overly sexualized because they might not pick up on social cues. It creates this dangerous power imbalance that some people will take advantage of.
I was just thinking about another blog post called Navigating Attraction and Romantic Feelings, a guide for parents. And it makes me wonder if parents are even talking to their autistic daughters about this stuff the same way they talk to their sons. Do autistic girls get the same tools and support to deal with these tricky social situations?
That's a good point.
Mm.
And sadly, the answer is usually no. The way we talk about sexuality and relationships is often very focused on men and boys.
Mm-hmm.
So autistic girls and women get left out of the conversation.
So we have these pressures to conform to gender roles, and then this increased risk of objectification and harassment. What's the third way the blog post says male entitlement affects autistic women?
The third one, and it's kind of tied to the first two, is the lack of representation and voice.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at leadership positions in government, business, even autism organizations, you don't see many autistic women.
Which goes back to what we were saying about how people misunderstand autistic women. If they're not in those positions of power, if they're not the ones making decisions, then who's going to fight against those stereotypes? Who's going to speak up for their needs?
Exactly. The post even mentioned that autistic people should start YouTube channels to share their stories. I think that shows how much they want to be seen and heard to control their own narrative.
So it's like all these pieces of male entitlement, the stereotypes, the objectification, the lack of representation, they all come together to make life so much harder for autistic women.
And those experiences can really take a toll on their mental health and well-being.
Yeah. The post talked about internalized negative stereotypes, increased anxiety, stress, and even trouble getting support. It's heartbreaking to imagine carrying all that around with you.
Absolutely. And if you're already dealing with things like sensory overload or social anxiety, which are common in autism, all that extra stress and pressure can be overwhelming. It's like constantly walking a tightrope, trying to balance who you are with what the world expects of you. It's a lot to deal with, for sure. But, the blog post doesn't just leave you feeling hopeless. It actually talks about what we can do to change things to make the world better for autistic women.
I was just thinking about that. Like, knowing about the problem is important, but what can we actually do to make a real difference?
Well, one thing the post mentioned was amplifying autistic women's voices. And we can all help with that. Like, we need to be seeking out their stories and their perspectives, whether it's through their writing art activism or just listening to their lived experiences.
So it's not enough to just listen ourselves. We have to share those voices with others,
Right.
like sharing their work, recommending their books, talking about them on social media.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about individual actions either. We have to challenge those systems that keep male entitlement going.
Okay, so zooming out a little, what does that look like? Are we talking about like policy changes?
It's a lot of things. Policies are part of it, for sure.
Mm.
Like, we need policies that support gender equality and neurodiversity
Mm.
in schools, healthcare jobs, leadership positions. We got to make sure autistic women have equal opportunities.
And part of that is getting rid of those harmful stereotypes, right? The ones that tell women what they can and can't do.
Definitely. We have to think critically about the messages we see and hear all the time. In the media, at work, even in our families. Those little unconscious biases can really affect how we treat autistic women.
It's like challenging stereotypes isn't just about calling out the obvious sexism. It's about looking at our own beliefs and actions and having those tough conversations, even when it's easier to just stay quiet.
Because staying silent can actually make things worse. It's about using our voices to fight for change and to create safe spaces where autistic women can connect and support each other.
Spaces where they can be themselves without feeling judged or pressured to fit in.
Exactly. Places where they can find strength in numbers and work together to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Real change starts with building a culture of respect, understanding, and inclusion where everyone feels valued.
And that's something we can all work on no matter who we are or how our brains work, whether it's through education or advocacy or just listening with an open mind. We all have a role to play in creating a better world for autistic women.
It's about seeing the struggles they face, understanding the barriers they have to overcome,
Yeah.
and committing to breaking down those barriers.
So we've talked about amplifying voices, challenging stereotypes, and creating safe spaces. What else can our listeners do? Like, what are some specific things they can do today to support autistic women?
One of the best things you can do is learn more about the experiences of autistic women. Go beyond those typical stories and look for resources and perspectives shared by autistic women themselves. Like, that cheap ABA website is a good start, but there's tons of other blogs, articles, books, podcasts out there. Find them, read them, listen to them, and let their insights change your thinking.
It's about being proactive, right? Like going out and finding those voices instead of waiting for them to come to us. And being open to learning new things about what autism really looks like.
Exactly. And once you've done that internal work, you can start taking action in the real world. Like,
Yeah.
you can start those tough conversations with friends and family who might be saying or doing things that are harmful, even if they don't mean to be.
Or speaking up when you see sexism or ableism,
Yeah.
even if it feels awkward. It's about using your privilege to make things better for everyone.
You're right. And you can also support organizations that help autistic women and girls. Donate your time, your money, your skills to causes that you believe in.
And I imagine it's also about pushing back against those power structures that keep male entitlement in place, whether it's at work in our communities or even in our relationships.
Absolutely. Support women in leadership positions, fight for equal pay and opportunities, and challenge those subtle biases that can hold women back.
Yeah.
It's about making a conscious effort to change things and create a ripple effect that goes beyond our individual actions.
I like that, creating a ripple effect. It's like a reminder that even small actions can make a big difference, especially when we all work together. It all goes back to understanding how autism and gender are connected, right?
That's the main point. We can't solve the problems that autistic women face without understanding how their identities intersect, how those societal expectations, power dynamics, and yes, male entitlement make their lives even more difficult.
It's about seeing the whole person, not just these little pieces. Understanding that being autistic is different for everyone and that being a woman changes that experience a lot.
Exactly. It's time to move past those simple stories about autism and recognize that autistic women have unique challenges and strength.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there like one question you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something that'll really make them think about all this?
How about this? How would our understanding of autism change if we, put the experiences of autistic women front and center?
Wow, that's a really powerful question. It makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about autism,
Right.
right? Like it challenges those typical stories and makes you see how diverse the autistic experience really is.
It makes you wonder if the way we diagnose and treat autism and support autistic people is actually biased towards men.
Yeah, and if we want to make things truly fair and inclusive, we need to start by listening to and learning from autistic women.
It's about shifting our perspective, opening our minds, and admitting that there's still so much we don't know.
Hmm.
And that's okay. It's through asking questions and exploring that we can create a more supportive world for all autistic people.
That's a great way to put it. Thank you so much for helping us understand this complex and important topic. Your expertise and passion have really made a difference.
It's been my pleasure. This conversation is so important, and I'm glad we had the chance to share these perspectives.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope this deep dive has inspired you to learn more about the experiences of autistic women. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going. We'll see you on our next deep dive.